I want to keep things moving, get to the next panel here on policy, labor, and long-term sustainability of the entertainment industry. Got a terrific group here. Jonathan Handel is senior counsel at Feig, Finkel, transactional entertainment law firm. He's also a longtime journalist and commentator on Hollywood labor and industry dynamics. Rahul is a partner at White & Case, previously served as deputy director of the FTC's Bureau of Competition. Hepner, senior legal counsel at the American Economic Liberties Project, where he works on antitrust and competition policy. And Zack Stentz is a screenwriter and producer whose work includes X-Men First Class, Thor, Fringe, and The Flash, and most recently the Jurassic World animated series. Thanks so much for doing this today. I would love to start with Zack, because I think the thing that I've been most struck by, I've already mentioned this, but in setting up this conference was you're one of the few people who, as creatives, who actually agreed to speak. A lot of people backed out. A lot of people were afraid to speak publicly. I'm interested to get your reaction to that. Do you feel that actors are, what might you attribute that to, or in terms of creative people right now?
I think there's just been such a tremendous amount of change in the last 5 years between consolidation and then the kind of the 1-2 punch of the strikes and the end of the streaming boom, and then now there's the asteroid of AI, and we're all wondering which of us are the dinosaurs and which are the mammals, and a lot of people in the industry, a lot of creative people in the industry are kind of hanging on by their fingernails right now, and there's so much kind of reflexive fear of change that anyone talking about change in any form other than we can't have any, everything needs to stay the way it is, I think they might be afraid of getting canceled on social media or ostracized or something. I hope that doesn't happen to me.
And, Rahul, you were recently at the FTC. Curious to get your thoughts. Does fear of speaking out in public remind you of any of the stuff that you worked on? I mean, obviously we've got a merger review going on. We're going to have other, possible, policy discussions about the entertainment industry, but does that ring any bells from being a recent enforcer, or even in the work you do now?
Yeah. No, thanks, Eddie, for the question. No, it does. It reminds me of any number of circumstances where you have an oligopolistic type market where the buyers are consolidating, and here we're talking about buyers of talent and of intellectual property, screenplays. The situation it reminds me of is, when I was at the FTC, I led, amongst other things, the pharmaceutical investigations. And when we were trying to build a case against pharmacy benefits managers, PBMs, this is now getting a little bit outside of what the town is really focused on. So I'm going to keep it light. But these are gatekeepers that mediate drug access, and these pharmaceutical companies who were the ones that were being, in addition to patients being harmed, were scared to go on the record, because they're like, these are the people that if we piss them off, they will cut access to our drugs. And these are pharmaceutical companies. These are multi-billion-dollar enterprises, and they were cautious about upsetting the PBMs because there were only 3 of them. And that's a very similar dynamic to what you're describing here, where we're getting fewer and fewer buyers of work product, of talent, of screenplays, and that's a scary proposition. And that's mergers that are being proposed. It's one fewer buyer for things like prestige TV.
And Lee, you also do a bunch of anti-monopoly work. Does it ring any bells? Does it remind you of anything where you've got the worker that's kind of afraid to speak publicly?
I think we see this all the time. We talk to people who are in the meatpacking industry who are afraid of, essentially the platforms that are controlling their output, Tyson and what have you. It's a phenomenon that exists across industries, and I think we can be a little bit more specific about what they're afraid of. I think Mr. Rao began to touch on it, which is that there are fewer opportunities when there are fewer buyers of content. That's a big thing. There's just fewer work to be had. We know that this has been the case because we've seen these mergers take place over the past decade. When 20th Century and Disney merged, we saw the output of those two studios cut in half. When Warner Brothers bought Discovery, again, we saw the output of major movies being distributed in wide release cut in half. I think it's fair to predict that we're going to see the same, despite the representations that Paramount is making about increasing output. So it's just a lot less opportunity in an industry, and an industry that is currently, blacklisting, people in the industry for speaking out on other political issues. I think that it's reasonable for people to want to sit this one out, and all the more important that they not.
Another complaint I've heard from people who might speak was they're either going to piss off Larry Ellison or their friends and colleagues and clients who, don't like, what's happening to CBS News. Have you gotten any, Jonathan, a feel for the politics around the Paramount deal at all in terms of the labor, fear of speaking out? Does the politics of the situation come up ever?
Well, the politics of the situation comes up in two different ways. I think that there is fear that individuals in the news business specifically, not so much the entertainment industry. When I listened to Makan's talk, I really was waiting for him to tell me how combining CBS News with CNN was pro-competitive. I didn't hear that, but I listened closely. But the guilds themselves have different degrees of political activism. The Writers Guild, when it fought against the talent agencies on antitrust grounds, engaged in very detailed, sophisticated analysis of antitrust issues and engaged counsel and advisors and so on and so forth. The Writers Guild and also SAG-AFTRA separately. SAG-AFTRA is part of the AFL-CIO. The Writers Guild is not, but they both are politically active, and I would expect to see them, opposing this, coming down against the merger quite explicitly. One of the things that makes it particularly delicate, and the Directors Guild less politically active, but we don't know where they're going to come down. Although when you think about it, if the nightmare scenario is that all these jobs go away and you can make AI make a movie, who is it that's going to make AI make the movie? Well, someone's going to type in prompts and sculpt those prompts and change them and say, I want this character to look this way and this scene to look that way. That's a director. That's a director. So the director's job is actually among the least vulnerable. If you think of one person and a computer making a movie, that person is the director, the last person standing. The Writers Guild, a week ago I predicted that and this goes back to something Tammy said, where she said that eventually the studios will have to sit down and talk about and talk about their feelings about training data and compensation for training data. Well, a week ago I predicted that the Writers Guild, when their negotiations start, which is next week, would be the guild that would make a particular issue of that. 2 days ago, the Writers Guild leadership, in fact, said publicly that they are going to make a particular issue of compensation for training data, even though the background law, as we've talked about all morning, is still unsettled. The reason for that is this. All three of the above-the-line guilds, when a film is reused, they get residuals. The film goes to streaming, then it goes to DVD, and it goes to linear, say, or foreign, or what have you. There are residuals. In other words, you get paid for the reuse of the work. But the writers have a second sort of bite at the apple, which is writers don't just help create the movie, writers create the script. And they're the ones who are given credit for, for the script. Scripts can be reused independent of the movie. If I write a script and 10 years later you want to do a remake or a reboot, you'll use my script. 3 years later, you want to do a sequel, you'll use the characters and worldview and plot lines in my script. You want to merchandise a character, or even sometimes a prop, like a lightsaber, for example. In all those cases, under certain circumstances, and we won't get into the technical details, writers get compensated for that reuse. So reuse of the script inures to the benefit of the writer. Reuse of the film inures to the benefit of writers, actors, and directors. And so the writers have had a long, long, long history of being very intricately involved with copyright law and working around copyright law, because the studio, look, the studio owns the script. They buy your script. Here's $200,000. We'll buy your script. $400,000 more if it's CAA involved, whatever. So the default rule there is, well, the studio owns the script. They can do whatever they want. They don't have to pay anyone anything. But the guild agreements attach conditions to that ownership and subtract away certain aspects of that blanket ownership of copyright. So we're going to see a very difficult negotiation, I think, between the Writers Guild and the studios on training data, because the studio's going to say, well, look, right now, the law's unsettled. A third-party schmuck can use these scripts and use the words that are said in the movie, which is part of the script, without paying us anything. So, so why should we be in a worse position than a random third party? That's going to be a very hard-fought argument. I don't think we're going to see another strike, but if there is another strike, it would be the Writers Guild.
We've had a lot of conversations today about a lot of the problems and the groups that are squeezing labor in this industry. You've got consolidation in the studios. You've got Netflix becoming more dominant, putting tougher terms on creatives, negotiating for tougher terms. You've got AI. You've got these ongoing labor negotiations as the studios are consolidating. And then you also have YouTube sort of lurking after successfully. We talked about the music industry earlier. Didn't mention that YouTube was out there letting music videos get pirated, and decimating the value of a music video. That wasn't really part of the conversation. So you've got, and then you have them kind of also lurking. Right. Potentially putting a floor on the price, right, of content, the way they did with music videos. Although obviously the Motion Picture Association is more aggressive in preventing copyright. But I want to ask: we've got this squeezing from big tech, from the studios, from AI. What is the solution? What do you guys all think of as a solution to this weakening or squeezing going on from different sides of the market?
I mean, I see that going on too. I think there's not nearly enough attention paid to the fact that, if we make movies and television, on some level our competition is people scrolling the fat lady smashing a glass bridge AI video, or whatever the trendy thing of the moment is. You see people on the bus and they're just going through their videos, and that's as much competition for eyeballs and competition for waking hours as another TV show is. But I think in terms of solutions, it's we have what we've always had, which is Hollywood still is very good at producing entertainment that America and the rest of the world really, really likes. And the big reason for that is that we have this incredible workforce that we've nurtured and grown over generations. And I think however things shake out, we have to make sure that we don't break the pipeline of talent on, acting, writing, directing, coming into the industry and learning from more experienced people and learning their craft. And that's frankly a big worry for me as well, because I see AI in particular as being a big threat to the kind of bottom rung of the industry where people get their start.
I agree, and look, there is no way that Para Brothers, or whatever they're going to call the company, is going to be able to service, to deleverage $80 billion worth of debt and make 30 theatrical movies a year and do that and achieve $6 billion. They're going to need more than $6 billion in savings, and do that without firing, without laying off 10,000 people or something. In addition, let's not forget the Ellison connection, by which I mean Larry Ellison. Larry Ellison is not a Hollywood type. His son became one. Larry Ellison is a tech guy, and part of what the Skydance Paramount merger was sold on was we were going to reinvent the studio. We were going to apply technological learnings and techniques and abilities that I have in my blood because I'm Larry Ellison's son, in order to make Hollywood more efficient. Because there's a big gap between the fact that on the one hand, with an iPhone and a YouTube account, anyone can be a filmmaker, and on the other hand, the cost of Hollywood movies, which is astronomical, $50 million, $200 million, $300 million. Reducing that gap but reducing that gap means reducing staffing. It's not simply, we're going to re-engineer the software stack. I mean, please, it's absurd. It's not just, we have duplicate accounting departments. We have too many lawyers when you add the two companies together.
No such thing as too many lawyers.
No, it's like a very frightening idea, actually. But the consolidation here does not bode well for preservation of the core of people, and we have a difficulty that's specific to LA as well as specific to the industry. The industry exists in LA, New York, Atlanta, and shoots, overseas as well. The American film industry, because of tax incentives, tax rebates. LA is if the industry is in dire straits, LA is in even worse straits than the industry as a whole is, because of runaway production. And we've done too little, too late, I think, in many ways. And there's infrastructure that's been built up elsewhere, so on and so forth. And so how you take all of that, and remember, with all the dire straits that we're talking about now, none of it has anything to do with AI, okay? Yeah, there's some AI that's being used in visual effects work and certain aspects of post-production work and so forth. It hasn't had a material effect yet. We're still dealing with the cutback due to Netflix winning the streaming wars, and the cutback in theater going due to COVID, and due to 20, 25 years of long-term decline. And before it was scrolling cell phones, it was video games. Video games were and when I think Machen said earlier, that's not, what YouTube does is not competition for, look, the night that I have dinner at In-N-Out is the night that I don't go to Spago. Goods do not have to be equivalent or equivalently priced to nonetheless be competitive substitutes. And that is the fact that if you spend a night scrolling, that's a night that you didn't go out going to the movies. It's a night that if you're multitasking, you didn't pay full attention to TV, let alone to the advertising that sustains a lot of television. So it's not even a five-dimensional chess game. It goes beyond that.
We probably could have the same comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you'll agree with me. I actually will push back on the idea that YouTube and TikTok are substitutes for the film industry. I think anybody who says that is saying that they are okay with letting Hollywood and the movie industry die.
I'm not okay with it, but they are a substitute activities.
I don't think that restaurants compete with movies. They may compete for what I want to do with my Friday night, but the quality and the price
so
of
is
a
hike,
restaurant.
right? If I go on a hike or if I go skiing, I'm also,
That's
that's how
right.
I'm spending my
That's
time.
right. Leisure time is a limited good.
For an antitrust market, when we are scrutinizing antitrust markets, the quality and the price of a movie is not going to be affected by a competitive constraint of the quality and price of content that is streaming on TikTok short form video. I think it's also a little disconnected from reality, and I want to kind of ground us in this notion that, and I'm not saying that you're disconnected from reality, but this
That may
notion,
be.
the
You
notion,
kind of did. No, I'm just kidding.
the notion that there is diminished demand for movie industry, that it is being replaced by TikTok or YouTube or an affinity for short form video, I think that is actually demonstrably false. A recent survey showed that it was actually Gen Z that was most likely to go see a movie in the theaters. The per movie box office average has completely rebounded since the pandemic and is higher than it's ever been. There is extraordinary demand to go see a movie in theaters. That demand is not being fed by supply, which is being constrained by movie studios that are consolidating and releasing fewer movies. It is also not being met by the consolidation of distribution, which is putting fewer movies into theaters. Theaters certainly need inventory to keep people coming back for more. I would go see a movie every night of the week if there were enough playing at my local theater, but that's not happening. And in fact, there's a huge distribution gap. Carrie Putnam put out a wonderful article for the Shorenstein Center a few years ago that documented a really large gap between the demand for independent film in particular and the lack of availability or lack of distribution of independent movies. Some 40 million individuals whose demand for independent films was being unmet by the current distribution model. And that's because of the consolidation too. I mean, these major Hollywood studios are not just production studios, they are also distributors. So, you know, the consolidation of the Hollywood studios also leads to constrained distribution. And then you have, of course, the major earthquake, which is Netflix and other streaming platforms, which are not just exhibitors equivalent to a theater alternative. They are also producers. They are also acquiring distribution rights and hollowing out that entire middle. Netflix's major competition in the acquisition of distribution rights is not the major Hollywood studios, because they have their own distribution. It is all of these kind of like A24, Neon, Lionsgate, the middle tier of distributors who are being crushed because Netflix can spend extraordinary amounts of money that it gains from its subscription revenue to outcompete them in the market. Maybe they're paying what's called a super competitive price. They are overpaying for content, and you know, to get it funneled through Netflix's streaming platform. And then, by the way, they never have to tell you if that content ever made money. They never have to justify whether they recouped that investment in that acquisition to distribute that content. So Netflix is really obliterating that middle tier of distribution while we're seeing concentration of the major studios, winnowing production and distribution there. And meanwhile, demand for movies has never been higher.
And ticket sales have never been lower. For the last 30 years, Lee, even prior to COVID, even prior to Netflix, ticket sales keep declining. Box office doesn't, because ticket prices go up.
I think that that's actually exactly consistent with my point, though. If there's not enough movies to go back and see, fewer people will be able to go out to the movies. Theaters will have to jack up prices. That's exactly what to expect from a Paramount Warner Brothers consolidation, is fewer movies, higher ticket prices in order to keep the theaters in business, and you know, furthermore, everything's going to be demand-based price.
That's a death spiral. The more you raise prices, the more you suppress demand.
It is a death spiral. I would agree with that.
What? Go ahead.
Oh, no, well, I just want to, you know, bring it a little back to what I think the question was, into like all these parties are getting squeezed. What is the solution? Is there a solution? And I think the answer, it's a yes and no, in the sense that there is a solution out there. We have laws on the books. I mean, the thing to the best counter to a lot of these people being squeezed is for there to be more competition so they have other alternatives as to where to go. And we have laws that directly address that. The no part of what I'm saying is there has to be a will to enforce that. And I think there's an open question whether there's a will or a desire to enforce at the federal level, but we are seeing some states who are active and willing to enforce their antitrust laws. I mean, I think one of the things we're seeing, and Lee touched upon this, is the squeezing out of the middle, right? These independent, smaller studios and production houses and writers. And when you look at Paramount Warner Brothers merger, right? You have two lots that are coming together. You have two producers that are coming together. You have two streamers who are coming together. I mean, you have Paramount and HBO. Paramount, when David Ellison took over, hired a new head of content that they were going to compete for prestige TV, the likes of HBO. We now have that and HBO under the same house. How does that work for a writer? They are now ostensibly, pitching to two studios, but economically it's the same buyer. And you are also promoting a merger that is funded by $80 billion in debt. That's a leveraged buyout, right? Like what those investors are going to be asking for is immediate return. What does that mean? Supercharging the IP that you're acquiring. That is also less work for the middle creatives, the ones that are doing, the prestige TV like Mad Men and stuff like that. There's less opportunities for those writers out there, and the reason for that is
And actors, by the
and
way.
actors. And to be clear, that's exactly right. It's not just the writers and the creative; it's the people below the line and the actors. It's everybody. And when you talk about Los Angeles, this is an entire city that is so inextricably and fundamentally tied to the health of Hollywood that has such derivative effects just in everyday life for people who don't actually touch the movie industry because all those people have secondary jobs.
So few Fortune 500 companies headquartered in the second largest city in the country.
Exactly.
Zack mentioned the need to preserve a robust, the talent pool. Make sure that the talent stays here. What's the prescription for that? How do what's the evidence that creates for that kind of clustering of talent in the same city? And then also, I think, I'm just curious what people think. I mean, we're talking about competition. I imagine that might be one of the things that leads to that.
Well, part of the answer to that is strong unions, and in particular, the residual system. The point of the residual system is not just to give actors, writers, and directors an element of participation in the success of a project. In that respect, it is similar to stock options in Silicon Valley. Even though people think residuals is crazy entertainment things, unique to entertainment, yes and no. But it also helps residuals when healthy, when substantial, help tide people over between jobs, because this is a gig, film in particular, but to an extent also television, is gig-based employment. It is not, I'm going to go work for Google and I'll have a job, I hope, for 3 to 5 years. It doesn't work that way in this industry.
No, and I think we lose sight too. At least those of us who are just observers. You look at your Brad Pitts, you look at your marquee actors. There's so many working actors out there.
Oh, it's a pyramid.
Like that is 99.9% of actors who are doing a gig here and there, maybe getting a walk-on role, and then just waiting for the next. And this is where the protection.
Auditioning, actually not just waiting.
Yeah,
but
not just waiting. You're
auditioning.
right. Actively.
Yeah, just going to what you were saying about residuals and what a feast and famine industry it is. The example people always give is Mark Cherry, the writer, was living off of his residuals from Sybil when he sat down and wrote the pilot for Desperate Housewives. That ended up making ABC a huge amount of money, but he would have, or very likely would have, fallen out of the industry and had to do something else for a living, and we would have lost that expertise that he had built over years if there hadn't have been the buffer of being able to of having the health care through his union and having residuals to kind of tide him over during the lean periods.
And Netflix, just to be clear, has destroyed back-end residuals. They have completely.
No, they haven't. They've destroyed back-end participation, not residuals. There's a common misperception. Participations are for stars, and Netflix did destroy the participation system. But residuals, for example, a writer's residual for a Netflix show is, for 1 year, is something like $30,000 or so.
Well, let me put
not-
this.
I'm curious about that
I'll
because
show you the formulas.
Great.
Because people think about Spotify,
yeah.
which is music streaming, which pays pennies on the dollar, and people think about participations, which Netflix did restructure. But residuals in entertainment, in filmed entertainment.
Let me reframe. Netflix has destroyed any transparency into back-end residuals.
No.
I actually think that this is true, and I appreciate a disagreement, but Netflix is not awarding back-end points the way
Back-end
that
points have nothing to do with
studios.
residuals, though.
Okay,
Let
maybe.
me put it this way. I am still getting, I just got, writers call them green envelopes because your residuals come in a very particular
So
green
you're
envelope.
not doing direct deposit then?
No, I want that endorphin, I want that hit of opening, and will this be a In-N-Out burger, or will this be a mortgage payment? You just never know. But as one of 4 credited writers on X-Men First Class, I'm still getting substantial residuals 15 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I got a one-time for the movie that I wrote by myself for Netflix about 7 years ago. I got a one-time buyout residual, and I'm never going to see anything. I'm never going to
not
see
true.
anything again.
So this is what Netflix is doing, by the way.
So I did get residuals. I'm just not going to get any more
Well,
from
you
them.
should- if the thing is
So
still
Ben
on the
Affleck
platform,
and
you
Matt
should-
Damon just put out a movie on Netflix called The Rip. It was gearing up to be their biggest movie of the year. And the big story about The Rip is that Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, through their artist equity program, negotiated for a back end payment for a below the line, every worker on the movie, above the line, below the line. And it wasn't, though, it wasn't a percentage of receipts. It wasn't a percentage of revenue. It was a one-time bonus if the movie hit certain internal data metrics. Which Netflix is not disclosing, which Artists Equity and Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are barred from disclosing by the terms of that agreement. So we will never know what the data metric is for that one-time bonus. And it is a one-time bonus. It is not a recurring payment based on the success of the program. So that is what I mean really by I think, it has
the residual,
transformed.
though.
It has completely transformed back-end payment for workers. And I think in order to solve this, to Teddy's question, because I think we need to put some solutions out of the table, and we know what they are. I think there needs to be data transparency. Creators need to know the value of their work in order to negotiate effectively for how much they should be compensated for creating it. That is such a basic principle of price signaling and market fundamentals. We cannot have a fair marketplace for workers unless they know the value of their creative work. And I think that right now that is tangled up in extremely untransparent data that Netflix owns, that it puts out on its own terms, that we've seen put out on blogs as if it's fact, but it's just not real. It's not a real basis for structuring a fair economy.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. I just want to say briefly, again, there's a difference between participations, between what Matt and Ben are doing voluntarily, and residuals. I wrote the only book on residuals. It's 200 pages. And I can assure you.
All right, let's keep going. We've mentioned a few things, obviously, in terms of solutions. There's dealing with the concentration. There's a merger going on. You could block that, or you could
Or condition it.
or put rules on it. You've got the AI stuff. You've got copyright. One thing that we haven't talked about yet in terms of solutions, you said transparency. One thing we haven't talked it sounds like there's a bit of a race to the bottom among states for subsidies and other countries for subsidies. Rahul, you worked in a government that famously was an all-of-government approach to competition that involved trade law. There have been some actors calling for trade protections in Hollywood. The governor has offered more subsidies. What's the solution if you're looking at an all-of-government approach to making sure that we make movies in America and don't have a race to the bottom in terms of subsidies and get predated by other countries when they're trying to subsidize their film industries?
I mean, that's a good, but that's a very complicated question. I think imposing trade protections over this type of creative work could be challenging, but I do think that the solution could be less about structuring barriers and more about making sure that producing in the United States is a favorable place to produce. Right.
The only way to do that is a federal tax incentive.
That's one.
Because we have higher labor costs in the U.S. and higher supply costs compared to places where movies are being shot internationally. And unfortunately, if we don't participate in the race to the bottom, we lose the race.
Oof.
I was going to say, I think Hollywood kind of got tremendously arrogant at one point and thought that production would never, there's a famous producer anecdote about someone wanting to shoot a biblical movie overseas, and the producer said, "A rock is a rock, a tree is a tree. We shoot it in Griffith Park." Now, they're going to go to Jordan and get the tax credit and get the tax credits there, and I mean, Lee, maybe you have a better solution, but I do think that at least within the United States, there needs to be a federal thing, or else we're going to have Georgia and Louisiana and New Mexico and California all competing against each other to throw taxpayer money at productions.
I have to. Part of me thinks that it's the comment that a participation in a race to the bottom is necessary in order for us to be able to compete with other countries. I just think is missing the point, and I don't think that there's any amount of public subsidy that you can pour into a fundamentally flawed marketplace that is going to save the industry. I think it's a misdirection from restructuring this marketplace in a way that promotes fairness up and down the production, distribution, exhibition, supply chain. We know what to do, really, and it's not film tax credits is a separate conversation, I think. But the conversation that needs to be had is restoration of the Paramount decrees, which were dissolved by, incidentally, I think he pointed to the irony himself, Paramount's new head legal officer. I think it was a mistake to dissolve the Paramount decrees. I think they should have been legislated and expanded to include streaming platforms. Netflix was doing some form of regulatory arbitrage because they were not covered by the Paramount decrees, which banned movie production studios from owning their own theaters. Well, Netflix owns its own theater. It's your TV in your living room and its own production studio. So they were really doing a regulatory arbitrage. And the solution there was not to get rid of the Paramount decrees, but to legislate to extend them to streaming platforms and make sure that Netflix does not own a production studio, does not also acquire distribution rights for ownership, but to separate, as the industry had been governed for 80 years, exhibition from production from distribution. That is how you get an equitable market structure that is worth, putting some money into. But without that, I don't think that any federal tax subsidy is going to solve the industry's problems.
I want to jump in because I agree with your analysis of the Paramount decree, and you mentioned also, without saying the words, FinCEN.
FinCEN, absolutely.
Which restoring at least some version of FinCEN so that you have more independent producers of television. The FinCEN rules prohibited cross-ownership of networks and distribution on one hand and production on the other hand, and were eliminated under Carter, I believe. And that making the market, the industry flow more smoothly, I hope you're right. That would be enough to avoid a race to the bottom. I don't know if I'm yet convinced, but it certainly is a precondition, it seems to me.
We had a couple people mention Netflix lack of transparency on the algorithm. You mentioned on residuals. Recently, the DOJ was looking into Netflix's potential acquisition of Warner Brothers, and it sounded like they had an expansive look into their business. Section 2 investigations and litigation historically have been able to at least put some transparency on the table. We saw that for at least 1 week in the Live Nation trial recently. What do you think about Netflix as a potential target for a Section 2-like investigation? Either, obviously DOJ, hard to imagine them, being very aggressive on antitrust, but what are your thoughts on a similar style antitrust investigation in Netflix?
Is there an antitrust question left now that Netflix is not the buyer?
Well, in terms of monopolization, Lee.
I think it's worth an investigation. I mean, they are an extremely dominant platform that is fully integrated across the entire supply chain and is self-preferencing content for its own platform, while diminishing wages, potentially paying supra-competitive predatory prices that they are never going to recoup. I mean, here's a fun example for you. Netflix recently purchased the production and distribution and exhibition rights for the Knives Out sequels. Knives Out 1 was a smash, made $330 million at the global box office. Netflix came in and purchased Knives Out 2 and 3 for $450 million. That is an unprecedented amount of money. It is an extraordinary acquisition buy. Paid Rian Johnson something like $100 million to come back and direct those two movies. Those two movies, I think, spent a collective 2 weekends each, 4 weekends total in movie theaters. They earned about $25 million at the box office. $25 million against Netflix's $450 million spend. There is no other studio, there is no other movie production studio that can justify that. Netflix has never had to demonstrate that it made a penny back from that $450 million spend beyond its $25 million. That actually, we used to enforce against things like that, and it was called predatory pricing, when you're able to pay far more than your competitors in order to box out your competitors to get market share with no ability to recoup on the back end. I mean, it seems to me, if you started looking at some of these situations in isolation, what Netflix is doing is rather anti-competitive.
I generally agree. I think the lack of transparency and the information asymmetry that allows is a problem, and it's something that I think a solution to that would really help level the playing field and address a lot of the issues that Lee's identifying. I will just say, just objectively, I think it would be very challenging to bring a monopolization case against Netflix, just based on the development of law. That's not a statement on whether that's right or not. It's just an unfortunate, or it's a reality.
I would argue that pushing for data transparency in particular would also help with the quality problem with streaming content and streaming features in particular. I know it's a huge complaint out there of like, why do so many streaming movies not really feel like real movies? Why do they feel like weird kind of like 30 a poster you'd see as a gag on 30 Rock? And I think a big reason for that is the lack of data transparency means that instead of above the line people sharing in the upside, they end up getting their compensation up front, and they end up getting their compensation as a percentage of cost rather than revenue or rather than profit. profit. So it ends up being like government accounting. It's like cost plus. It ends up being like cost plus accounting, and all of the incentives are to pump up the budget because you're getting paid as a percentage of that. So that's why you have these movies that ostensibly cost $200 million, but you look at them and you wonder where all the money went because it didn't go on screen because everyone was taking their piece up front. And I think it would help with the quality problem if you were able to, if with that transparency you had people sharing in the upside, because that incentivizes everyone to do a great job, maybe accept less money up front, but you're gambling on there's nothing creative people love better than gambling on yourself.
That's compelling. I like that.
In the lead up to this conference, I had one of the guests, I just want to represent who backed out, called Netflix the Eye of Sauron in terms of dealing with them. That's how much power they had to this person. That's like what they call them in terms of dealing with them from a negotiating standpoint. So this person did not attend the conference, but he's here in spirit. There's
another example, by the way. SAG-AFTRA has an agreement with all the studios, and they have including Netflix, and they have a separate agreement with Netflix.
Well, there you go. And then Canada has a rule where streamers have to pay a tax effectively that goes into a pool that goes back to content creation in Canada. Interestingly, the Motion Picture Association vehemently opposed that, and that's why we ended up looking into it. Would that be a potential solution here in the U.S.? I noticed that Netflix is a member of the Motion Picture Association, and so
Yes.
potentially that was a reason they didn't like that idea. But so in terms of thinking about other solutions, Canada has this one that's kind of hanging out there, and if you read about it, it seems to be working pretty well. That money then gets spent on Canadian, show production, I only bring it up because of how vehemently the industry pushed back on it. So it seems like it might work.
It might, except do you really want Donald Trump to be close to a source of money that's funding content?
No, I'm asking you guys.
That's the potential difficulty.
We had this
government control.
We had this conversation around the Google ad tech trial, when there was a lot of discussion and analysis around how social media platforms had kind of disintermediated the direct relationship between journalism and readers and readership, and how that actually had a really severe effect on journalism budgets because they were no longer brokering advertisement relationships. The media platforms were, from Google to Meta. And so, we actually in California tried to do something similar to what Canada had done on journalism preservation and pass a California Journalism Preservation Act for political reasons that are unsavory. That was a thwarted effort, but it's not a bad effort. The other effort that is afoot is, again, this idea of structural separation. If you disintermediate Google's control over publishers and journalists on the one side, advertisers on the other side, and the ad exchange in the middle, it has less ability to amass all of those revenues for itself, to gain that 30% exchange fee, and to allow for publishers and advertisers to, again, negotiate with each other directly. Netflix is not terribly unlike this in the sense that they are kind of intermediating as a platform between viewers and production studios and creators on the other side. And Netflix has effectively been able to disintermediate that relationship between consumers, viewers, and producers on the other side to extract a lot of revenue for itself. And I think that if you structurally separate their control over production and exhibition, again, you kind of solve this problem structurally. It is really a structural issue.
How does that solve I don't disagree with your remedy, but what I'm not seeing is when a producer decides where they want to film a movie, they run budgets. If I shoot it in Ireland, if I shoot it in Atlanta, if I shoot it in Los Angeles, and those budgets have labor costs, they have all sorts of costs. And obviously, the further away you are, there are transportation costs. How does fixing Netflix's dominance and Paramount Warner Brothers' dominance, if they indeed they do merge, how does fixing those things reduce the cost of production in the U.S. so that we can compete effectively with the U.K.?
I think it makes the financial metrics more sound. I think it enables a more rational conversation around how things are funded in the first place. Without any, transparency or structural, integrity to this market, everybody's going to be taking their maximum cut at every single juncture. You don't have any friction between the different parts of the industry to create the negotiation, to bring costs down, to drive output up. So I genuinely think that if you inhibit consolidation in this industry, block the Paramount Warner Brothers merger, make sure that that doesn't proceed, restore a streaming decrees types concept so that Netflix does not control production, distribution, and exhibition, that a lot of other players enter the market and figure out how to do things in a more innovative way.
All right, well, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for doing this.